We will call to order this meeting of the Joint Conceptual Workshop of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission for Thursday, March the 24th, 2022. I will start off with a roll call. Commissioner Allen, I don't see yet. There you are. Okay. Commissioner Franks, not yet. Commissioner Harrison.
Present.
Commissioner Lindsay is present. Commissioner McLemore.
Present.
Commissioner Mann.
Here.
Commissioner Orr.
Present.
Alderman Peterson.
Here.
And Commissioner Williamson.
Present.
And Alderman Berger.
Here.
Alderman Brown.
Present.
Alderman Potts.
Present.
Alderman Baggett.
Present.
Alderman Barnhill. Not yet. Alderman Blanton. Alderman Hanson. And Mayor Moore.
Present, accounted for, sir.
Good deal. Thank you. Okay. Accommodations have been made to ensure that the public is able to view this meeting. The public may view the workshop in the following ways. Watch the meeting on Franklin TV or the City of Franklin website. You can watch the live stream through the City of Franklin Facebook and YouTube accounts, or you can attend in person in the boardroom. The public may also watch the meeting on the TV out in the lobby. So the first item on our agenda tonight will be, item number 1 is a status update on the Joint Conceptual Workshop discussion. So, Mr. Garth?
Thank you, Chairman Lindsay, Alderman Moore, and Commissioners and Aldermen. Alderman Brown is the board's liaison to our Development Services Advisory Commission, and we've had several discussions. I just want to give you a very, very quick update. As a coincidence, we don't have any planned development presentations this evening, but what we have decided to do through the various conversations is to just test drive a different format during the Joint Conceptual Workshop. And it'll look something like this, and we'll modify it as we go, is that we'll have the applicant give a very brief overview of their project. And we'll also ask them to answer the question essentially is, why are they going through the PD process instead of developing under the established zoning district where they are? So we have an understanding of why they're doing that, and you do too when I say we. And then we'll have them address potential impacts to the development. Really start to hone in on what might be those challenges be. It could be traffic connectivity, floodway, floodplain, watersheds and hillsides, and maybe some of the concerns that the neighbors have brought up. So then you can ask some questions. Staff will follow up with a brief summary of what they've seen and then open it up to questions, not going around to each commissioner and alderman, but to provide direct feedback. And depending on the number of items on any given night, we'll try to hone in on a reasonable time frame, because we also talked about that not all projects are created equal. Some require longer time, some a lesser time. And then in those rare instances, if we have a lot of applications, and we'll bring this back to you too, we've started to create a matrix to prioritize projects in case we have too many. But in any case, we'll always report what projects may not make it to the Joint Conceptual Workshop. And that's really it for the time being, and I want to just emphasize that we're going to work with developers that are going to be coming before you to try this approach out in the coming months. And we'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any comments for Mr. Garth? Okay, seeing none. The next item on our agenda, item number 2, is the Goose Creek Coordinated Study Update. Staff presentation.
Well,
Okay, go.
Good evening. Just like to start by saying thank you for your time. My name is Adam Pieper. I'm a planner with Rundell Ernstberger Associates. And I'm joined by my colleague Cynthia Bowen. She's a partner and director of planning, and both myself and Cynthia as project manager of Envision Franklin and Connect Franklin have some previous experience here in Franklin and certainly appreciate the opportunity we've been afforded to work with you all again on this coordinated study of land use infrastructure and the roadway network for the Goose Creek Basin. We are joined, in addition to our support staff at REA, by CDM Smith, the transportation engineer on the project, and then Tischler Weiss, who is looking at the market analysis and some of the financing and funding strategy as we get further along in this process. They were here with us in January. They are not here tonight, but you will certainly be seeing them again. Just a brief overview of what we'd like to talk about tonight, give you an update of kind of where we are in the process, as well as certainly allow plenty of time for discussion. We'd really like to understand your thoughts and vision and expectations for this area. And we want to make sure that this study is realistic. It's unfair to residents. We certainly don't want to be including recommendations or analyzing scenarios that are not grounded in reality. It's also unfair to you all to then have to defend, you know, a study or plan. Again, if these recommendations weren't realistic to begin with. So, you know, we don't want to focus purely on residential development. If office projects would come forward and you all would think those are appropriate, we need to make sure those are accounted for. Similarly, we don't want to focus purely on mixed use if that's not in line with the market, and then, purely residential petitions are going to be coming forward. So again, just a little bit about what we've heard already, some of the results of the market analysis that, like I said, Tischler Weiss did, and then we have some really preliminary land use concepts that we would like to get your input on before we move forward with tweaking those and starting to run the transportation analyses. This statement was from the RFQ that the Planning and Sustainability Department put out that I think succinctly describes really why we're here. Obviously, this is an in-demand area, and given ongoing discussions with expansions to the urban growth boundary, as well as recent annexations in this area that are not reflected in the Envision Franklin study, as well as other transportation and planning studies of the city, it's of critical importance. So in terms of the area we're looking at, from a land use and utility perspective, we're generally talking about east of I-65 and south of Long Lane, which is an area that comprises about 2,500 acres. The transportation study, expands beyond that a little bit. Obviously, any growth or development that would happen in that area has impacts outside of it. So the transportation study does move east of 65 over to Lewisburg Pike, also north to kind of a line, imaginary line if you continued Henpeck Lane. And that includes 18 existing intersections, 7 new intersections, and then one of the fundamental purposes of this study is to evaluate a potential new I-65 interchange, and if not an interchange, a flyover in an area south of the Goose Creek interchange. So in terms of our understanding of the project and how we approach these, in a simple sense, what we are seeking to answer is, what does the community support? What does the site support? And what does the market support? And how do those hopefully overlap? And if not, where the gaps are, is that a financing gap between, what the community wants to see and what the market may support, or what's needed in terms of infrastructure? So in trying to answer those questions, obviously outreach with property owners and residents is of critical importance. Like I said, developing and evaluating those two potential build-out scenarios, one with the interchange, one with the flyover. A critical piece of that is expanding the city's Vistro traffic software model that was started for Cool Springs to include this area, so it informs this study, but can also be used to evaluate future development petitions. And then the fiscal impacts of these land use scenarios and how an infrastructure funding and phasing plan may work. So we were here in January and conducted a number of stakeholder meetings, as well as a community meeting that was open to anyone and everyone interested in attending. We spoke to property owners, citizen and resident groups, utility providers, obviously including the city and others, transportation, again, both city and from a regional standpoint, economic development, tourism, developers, design professionals, so trying to get broad input on some of the existing opportunities as well as challenges in the area. I won't go through all these, but some of the key themes that came out of that were obviously needing a plan that encompasses or looks at this whole district so that development petitions can be evaluated within that framework and not just in the vacuum of their own merits without a broader context, or in essence, that whatever the first project that's approved, that shouldn't get to dictate the remaining framework. It should work into a framework that was already planned and agreed upon. And another key one is that obviously this is not intended to be another Cool Springs or replicate Cool Springs. And what we heard was that from a retail restaurant service business standpoint, that it should really serve the district and not be regional in scale like Cool Springs is. We'll go into some of the current transportation issues in a minute, but when all of the existing development entitlements come online, there are going to be some significant challenges with respect to the existing roadway network. And obviously, larger system improvements are going to be needed to alleviate those issues. But those improvements are going to be predicated on additional development, which obviously is then going to create more traffic volume. So really what we're going to be trying to do is find this balance and how that works from a financial standpoint too. Obviously, costly infrastructure extensions are needed. So there's going to be an interest in density to support those. And then it, again, just as this feedback loop with the transportation system. So that's our challenge. Obviously, if it were easy, we wouldn't be here talking about it. But again, and then I will just say, obviously, needing to expand some of the city's existing tools related to conservation and protection into this area, because not being presently zoned or covered by Envision Franklin, that needs to happen. So I'm going to give just a couple highlights or key takeaways from the market assessment. From a residential sector standpoint, if you look 2017, 2018, the city was realizing more construction than approvals. Since 2019, that's kind of flipped, and you're approving more new units than are being constructed on an annual basis. And going back to 2001 in terms of residential entitlements that have been approved but not yet constructed, that is 13,700 units. That being said, if we look at the 20-year population increase that was included in the 2020 annual development report, Accommodating that population increase would require over 1,700 new housing units. So you've got 13,700 online, and that's still a deficiency of 3,400 units. So a real opportunity to provide some of those needed units in this area. But again, going back to that point of, density needed to support not only commercial developments, but also infrastructure extensions. In terms of the retail sector, Tischelbeis did some analysis here looking at kind of existing retail supply or sales in the city as a whole as compared to service jobs and how that equates to retail or restaurant sales per job. Based on household spending, retail jobs per 1,000 housing units is about 289. And with the average square foot of retail per employee, you're looking at about 136,000 square feet of retail demand per 1,000 housing units. Which may sound like a lot, but when you really get into it and are organizing it on the ground, 136,000 square feet retail only consumes about 16 acres of land at a floor area ratio that's kind of representative of what Franklin has captured in the last few years. Yes, and so that is in addition to existing entitlements in Barry Farms. And then just from an office sector standpoint, second largest market in the Nashville metro, but higher than average vacancy at the moment, almost 20%. So if we've heard the city is absorbing about 200,000 square feet of office space annually. So if you look at existing vacancies and again, current entitlements primarily on the multiple Barry Farms tracts, the vacancy and entitlements combine to basically be able to absorb 20 years worth of office demand. So we're not seeing a huge need for additional office space beyond what's entitled in this area. That being said, obviously the interchange or interstate and potential new interchange are kind of an X factor. And then the question arises of obviously with this vacancy, does that mean, maybe some of the existing office product is not what is most desired in the market right now in terms of, maybe being in a more walkable area in close proximity to amenities. When we had the economic development and tourism focus group meeting, we heard, that they had just gotten some, feedback more recently that Franklin was actually losing out on a couple projects to Nashville because of the urban framework and activity, walkability, and things like that. So, the typical suburban office park with surface parking where you got to get in your car if you want to go anywhere to lunch, things like that. Maybe not in demand as much. So, that being said, again, I think there is still some potential for office demand here, but not tremendous. So in terms of our preliminary land use concepts, I would just point out that, again, when we had the community meeting in here a couple months ago, I think there were some confusions with our process and the UGB expansion process, as well as concerns of the city potentially taking property. That is obviously not the case here. Development projects are going to happen based on landowner wishes. No one is going to make anybody sell their property if they don't want to. So these land use changes are going to happen in terms of when market forces dictate and when property owners desire them, and not until then. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, at full build out of Barry Farms, as well as some of the other recent residential entitlements in the area, the existing roadway network is going to face some serious challenges. And so what this exhibit shows, these red lines are, the yellow or yellowish orange is the morning peak delay, and the more reddish orange is the evening queuing. And some of these are over 1,000 feet, which would translate to potentially a 4-minute delay, or 3 or maybe 4 traffic signal cycles if you're trying to turn left. This does account for improvements that have already been negotiated with developers. So you see the Chadwell and Reams Fleming entrances, as well as some other geometry changes along Paytonsville Road, additional lanes, signal timing, and things like that. So when all of this development comes online, there's going to be some serious delays. So we, like I said earlier, we have to balance improvements to the system to alleviate these delays with the additional traffic generated by developments that are going to be funding some of those improvements. I think the interchange or flyover helps to alleviate, obviously, some of these concerns, but we need to determine how much that is. So in terms of the land use concept, that would include a full interchange, which the line work doesn't show up as much, which is just north of the legend there on the box. And I apologize, our study area is oriented more north-south and doesn't work as well on a landscape slide like this. So I'll walk through the colors real quick, but pink generally being mixed use, so could include a combination of office, retail, multifamily apartments or condominiums. The brown areas would be multifamily apartments or condos again. The orange areas are a residential mix. That may include single-family detached houses, single-family attached, like townhomes and things like that, as well as some multifamily units in there. And then the yellow areas would be primarily single-family residential detached subdivisions of varying densities as we transition into some of these conservation areas. I want to also point out that this is not a design concept discussion. These are more general, kind of just land use categories that we will then start to generate potential traffic volumes off of. After we develop our scenarios and have run the transportation analyses, one of our final recommendations will be to provide some insight or inform potential Envision Franklin updates and what that might mean for design concepts in this area, but this process will not change any of that. So I know some of the titles are similar, but I do want to try and keep those separate. And then I will just point out on this concept as well, we're looking at some additional intensity or development on the Ag Expo property. One of the things we heard was an interest in being able to host larger events there, looking at the 40 or 50,000 square feet I think they have currently, potentially adding maybe upwards of 100,000 square feet of conference space on that site.
From the county? The county's talking about this?
The tour is, that did not come from the county. That came from the tourism officials and an interest in being able to attract larger events, and that there really isn't anywhere in the city that can accommodate that in the present. So this concept generally obviously keeps with mixed-use development on the Reams Fleming tract, as that's already entitled, but would then focus additional mixed use around what is the new interchange, as well as at some key intersections as we look at Paytonsville Road potentially being extended east to Long Lane, and then Carruthers Parkway continuing south, really that Carruthers Parkway, Paytonsville Road, and then this new east-west connector being a central focal point in the area, and like a mixed-use town center there being able to integrate and connect well with a lot of the potential residential development in the area. The flyover concept dials back the intensity or development density some. And like I said, we still need to run the transportation numbers. This may still prove to be a challenge at some key locations. But we're starting with obviously some concepts that we think have been informed by the discussions we've had with all of the various stakeholders, the results of the market analysis I was just talking about, and then how the long-range transportation improvements start to frame new development areas. In this scenario, without the interchange, we don't see as much opportunity for mixed-use development right there with the flyover and decreased direct access. We've shown some office uses there, so maybe still appreciating the visibility of the interstate, but being okay with less direct access that retail or restaurant uses might be looking for. And then really reducing the residential density even before, Dyke Bennett along Paytonsville Road. Continuing residential mixed development on what would be the Carruthers Parkway extension. And then here again, since the density kind of decreases the further you get away from the interchange, we've moved up some of that mixed use area, town center potential to between Paytonsville, what would be the Carruthers Parkway extension. And that's kind of immediately east of what is currently planned for office use on the Reams-Fleming tract. So with that, I'll pause because, like I said, I want to ensure we have plenty of time for discussion and to get your thoughts on the area. So in terms of, balancing this desired intensity or density of new residential construction with, an already challenged transportation network and preservation goals, I would just be curious to get your all's thoughts on that. And as projects come forward to you all at Plan Commission and ultimately BOMA, what are the characteristics you're looking at?
Chairman, if I might?
Yes.
Well, one of the things on page 18 that just really screamed at me, your interchange concept, and I'll admit, because we're looking in generalities, I know this is just an overview from your quick overview, just screamed at me. You say your interchange concept, and first of all, looking at page 17, where you already have 4-minute backups and all that, and that you're saying that of course is with all the things we've already approved, even with the improvements.
Yes.
And then when I look here, you say your interchange concept supports higher densities along Long Lane. I'll skip Carruthers Parkway, but in Paytonsville Road. Mm-hmm. I drive this every Sunday, twice, to church and back from church.
Yep.
That just started, I started getting quivers over that.
Sure.
Would be very interested in how that would support that, because even now with it, we have so many things that haven't been built. Mm-hmm. Even now, just looking at that, I don't see that ever. I don't see that in my lifetime.
Okay. And yeah, so, and obviously the interchange, if it would be approved by TDOT and FHWA, would still be distant on the horizon, right? Those things take a long time. But like I said, what we're trying to balance is obviously this roadway network that is challenge, and like I said, any new improvements are likely going to come with development, so we have to see ultimately how that balances out. But at the same time, you know, we understand there's discussions about expanding the UGB in this area. The city's already annexed, I think, 800-plus acres, and obviously Andrew and other staff are getting inquiries about these properties. There's a number of them that are currently on the market. So if the answer is, you know, this crashes the transportation model and we have to scale way back, if that's the direction, you know, certainly that makes sense. But I would expect that you're still going to see development inquiries, right? So if the answer is we can't support it, that may be the answer, but then I would guess, you know, then it becomes a question of why was that property annexed, and, you know, should the UGB ultimately be expanded? It is a challenge, and I know we're early, and like I said, we have to figure out how much additional traffic what exactly the planned improvements do to alleviate current issues, and then what is the increment they could support.
And the reason I say that is because although I know we are the city of Franklin, the county has already approved going down, if you go farther down Long Lane, the farm that has been there forever, the farms, all of them have started grading all the way up to, I forget the name of the road, right before you get to Crowder Lane. Every last one of them now are being developed,
Yeah.
all of them. And so now, even though we are the city and we will end before then, we've got to take in consideration that they are all along Long Lane are being developed now.
Right.
So what it comes down to, though, is the discussion and the decisions, both for the Plan Commission and BOMA, of, you know, what are you going to decide, and then how do you utilize your precious resources in terms of tax dollars, in terms of the road improvements that you're going to make, and then in what time frame? And so, you know, who makes those? Is it the city? Is it the developer? And so those are some of the policy questions, you know, based on the decisions that are made here in terms of what we do in the land use, and then how that impacts the road network and the modeling that they do. So it's all very well related. And of course, then, you know, the property owners who own that have to understand, you know, what the decisions that you make and how that's going to impact them. So it's all tied together, which is why we come back and say, you know, these are hard discussions, these are hard decisions to make. And so, you know, why we don't want to put anything in the plan that isn't going to be realistic.
Right. Andrew, does staff have comments to make at this point? Okay. So just to kind of keep, because Marcia asked the question, and this slide number 17, I think, is the Goose Creek interchange.
Yes, sir.
And so the caption reads, "Full build-out of currently entitled property in the Goose Creek area leads to significant queues over 1,000 feet at major intersections." So we look at the overall scope of this, and there's a vast expanse of yellow and green out to the south and east of this whole area that we're master planning for. How much of that area is considered part of what is currently entitled already? Because it seems that it's suggesting that with what's currently already entitled is already going to create traffic issues on these major sections here. And I thought that was the biggest bridge in Middle Tennessee, quite honestly.
So those entitlements are basically the 3 Berry Farms
Okay.
properties, as well as South Vale, and is it Sunny Meadows at Sunnybrook? Villages of Sunnybrook, Southbrook, excuse me. So yeah, so that takes into account the existing traffic in the area that comes from counts over a couple years. There is some annual growth assumed to those background numbers, and then it adds these entitlements to that. Whether, and ultimately, these entitlements, whether they, come online next year or 5 years from now, that map on 17 is basically like a kind of 2030 picture if everything were to be developed by 2030.
Yeah, and I'd say just kind of looking at this, I think it is going to be said that a lot of the development in part will be driven by market factors and kind of what development requests we see go through. One thing kind of getting about the traffic that came to mind is looking at kind of the intersection where we have 65 and 96, because currently, there's a lot of failing stuff going on. And just kind of looking at, what could have been done to prevent that as it did build up. And I know Goose Creek, there's a lot of space and a lot of parcels out there that have the potential to be a higher density than they are. So that would probably be, for both the interchange concept and the flyover, would be, how do we get a tackle of transportation networks in anticipation that in the future, we don't want to put the city in a position where they have to buy extra space next to the roads to increase all this infrastructure, because it's just incredibly difficult and
Sure.
it's also extremely expensive. The other just comment on the flyover concept, and again, this is projecting out, longer, years out in the future, and by the time it gets developed, market will be totally different. But looking at if you have a kind of a flyover instead of an interchange there, and just kind of the office, the current market is looking that we have 20% openings in office, and so kind of understanding, okay, if at the time that gets built out, if market factors don't see, office as being, attainable in that
Sure.
area, just to get there, because you'd have to take, probably Carruthers in or all these other things to occupy that office area. So, just kind of looking at if that's ends up the case, then wondering if, this general areas might have to be tweaked in the future or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, and I should also point out, what would be the new east-west connector from Paytonsville Road and then kind of going southwest that makes the flyover, ultimately connects over to Lewisburg. And then I think what we've heard from TDOT is some likely improvements to the Lewisburg and 840 interchange. So that actually might be the travel path to get to like office down here.
Okay.
If that makes sense. But yeah, and I should say, again, going back to the interchange graphic, certainly in the current scenario, and even with additional improvements, everything in the area likely still has to go there, right? That, with maybe additional retail development on the east side of 65, like if there's a grocery store there, maybe that prevents some of the Ladd Park and other traffic having to use Paytonsville or Goose Creek bypass to get over to Berry Farms. But at the same time, for the most part, we know most of the office workers are going to be using the interchange, right? There is obviously some kind of internal Franklin traffic of people who are both residents and work in the city. And that's actually higher than what we see in a lot of communities, but knowing that, again, most of the office development is going to generate an interstate trip.
So what?
Yes, sir.
For either concept, what's the trigger? How much development are we going to see before we need either one of those?
Well,
Because that's what we need for an approval process, to say, okay, we can do so much with what we got, but now we got to do something different.
right, and one of the other things we talked about, we've talked about internally, and it came up in the stakeholder meetings too, that I probably should have mentioned, is obviously this area is different, certainly now and than when a lot of the larger development projects in Franklin happen, like the Berry Farms, for example. It would be incredibly challenging and expensive to come in and assemble that amount of acreage. Right now in this area, there's a number of smaller properties, a lot of different property owners. So the infrastructure and transportation improvement funding mechanisms, or the current model where it's, impact fees will be credited to the improvements that the developers make, and then anything over that is assumed to be their responsibility. Knowing that that's going to be a challenge here, as it requires significant roadway extensions, significant water and sewer extensions down Paytonsville Road. What amount of development necessitates this is a difficult question to answer, because obviously you could make the argument that, some of these roadway enhancements are needed
Right.
with no additional development.
Right now.
But who's
Right
paying
now.
for that?
Yeah.
Looking at the
Right,
picture
I
right
think,
now.
the assumption is that those improvements are made when other development projects happen, and like I said, that's where we get into this balance of, does it do more harm than good, and if so, should we look at what we have? And that's really, again, like I said, that's what we're interested in hearing your perspectives on tonight, because ultimately you're the ones that are going to be making the decision about specific projects, not Cynthia and myself.
We
And
can say it right now.
Okay, Alderman Berger?
Oh, wait, could
I'm sorry.
we,
I-
there's something
I-
up here
I'm-
before?
Yeah, go.
I'm sorry, what?
Is it okay?
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
well,
ahead. I'll-
in the
I'll
really
wait.
big picture, what's the situation with Long Lane? Is that going to be a
It's already.
flyover, or is it going to be anything else? And, I mean, that's such a hugely expensive project that we've been talking about, but we haven't even thought about the money for it yet.
And is that including on the exhibit on page 17?
yes,
Online?
page 17 does take into account the Long Lane
What
flyover.
about it?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it's funded.
But I'm just still saying,
Is it
that is a
included?
long way, and money-wise and time-wise, I would
Talk
think.
to us,
No,
please.
we've already funded that.
Yeah, Long Lane is a funded project in our CIP. The design is, we're in the preliminary design stage. There's, 41 tracks that we got to acquire, significant acquisition. But it was our board's number one priority, and our staff is working extremely hard to try to deliver that. So as we work through the preliminary design, we're, looking at utility conflicts now, and we're delivering that project as fast as we possibly can. But it is a funded project in our capital plan as the number one BOMA
Funded all the
priority.
way through construction.
Yes, sir.
But, there's still some problems to think about there, and this is not a part of what we're talking about tonight, but that you've got what kind of grade going from one side to the other? To have to build that thing and to make it work? So it's not just gonna be a level thing, it's gonna be going like that. Okay, another thing would be the water. I really hadn't thought about that until it was just kind of mentioned and everything. Who's the water supplier for this?
This is in the Mill Crofton
Millcrofton.
That's what I
district.
wondered about.
They were a part of the utility stakeholder discussion. What they indicated was they have adequate, or they have capacity or adequate supply. It becomes an extension issue and a costly one at
Oh,
that.
right,
Yeah.
good point. So in other words, you think they have the supply, but,
We got to get it down the road.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So it would be coming from,
If you look at, it's their, I can't use the pointer on here, can I? Oh, these are their water towers. Can you see it? Right up here?
Okay.
Behind the Ag Center. And then it needs to kind of come around and then down Paytonsville Road.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any planning commissioners? Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
well, go ahead, Ben.
Go to
You
bed.
No,
go
it's
ahead.
all right.
Around,
All right, well,
Go ahead, I'll
That's
come
okay.
later.
All right.
Go ahead, Ben.
I'm a little confused a bit. I'm almost feeling like we're rolling the dice, you know what I mean? Do we have the cart before the horse on this? Because it seems to me we would do a major regional study and plan for this area. I don't see a major regional plan. I don't think we've even discussed it unless I'm missing it. Like, you know, on the east side, on the west side, we have a grocery store, we have Publix. On the east side, we're going to need a grocery store eventually. We're going to need different things. And it just seems that, what do you want? What do you see? What do you feel? And I'm like, wait a minute, no, we need a regional plan here to make proper decisions. Talk about retail, you talk about grocery stores, you talk about emergency management, in infrastructure, roads. So I'm looking at this thinking, I think when they laid out Berry Farms, if I'm not mistaken, Adam, over there, didn't you do a major regional plan of the entire area? And look at West Haven, when they, and I don't know if they started out with a major plan, but I know they had a plan, and they've added, and they have all the amenities that they need out there. They have doctors, and they have grocery stores, and they have, so, and that's a contained area. You know, it's not on an interstate. You know, it's not on the exchanges that come off of an interstate. So that's a little different. But if they're doing these master plans, I would think that we would need a major master plan of that entire area. So that just dawned on me as we were talking. And then it was said that this is not a regional area. I would beg to differ with that. It is. This is Cool Springs 2.2, 2.0. This is. You can deny it all day long, but it's the second Cool Springs. And it will be. Maybe not in our lifetime, it will be. Come back in 50 years and you'll see that it is. Because look at Cool Springs. I used to live in Alabama. We used to drive up here. It was, you know, green fields. And then the first building was built. Then we saw the mall being built, and we went, wow, look how this place is changing. Now look at it today. Look at it today. When I drove up here in 1979, 1980, it was so different. So I think that the elephant in the room basically is, it's a regional draw. It's going to be a regional area, especially if we put an interchange, which will probably come. I think we'll see an interchange and a flyover needed in this area. So, and generally, we're not in the road building business. Roads are built by developers. Always been told that that's true. So developer driven, but, you know, we need a regional plan to do that. The other thing is, when we talk about expos, egg expos, which is already there, but we talk about a conference center, conference space. If you've done any work with conferences and convention and visitor bureaus, you know that in order to have a true conference center, you've got to have rooms on site. You're talking about 1,000 rooms on site. So unless we're planning on a conference center there, if we are, we better not if we don't have rooms on site. That has to be hand in hand. So I think there's just a lot of things to be talked about here. And there's been a lot of interesting comments made and questions brought up, but I think we're over here when we need to be here. And we need to look at it in a broader base, and we need to have a regional plan for it if we really want to do it right. That's just my comments.
And my assumption is that that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
that this is a regional.
Well-
That's what we're
plan
doing with
that-
Envision.
So,
Yeah, but it's sort of guessing, like, the questions, well, do we see a grocery store here? Well, you might see one, you might not, you might see it, you might not. Everybody's gonna have a different opinion. how do we, if we gave you all a blank sheet of paper and said, plan this area, plan this regional, we'd have a ton of different kinds of plans. And so I'm probably asking, how do we, with your expertise and your help, how do we do this regional plan in a way that's going to make sense to answer all these questions and things that are brought up?
Right.
Maybe I'm missing the boat here, but it just seemed to me I didn't see that.
Yes, ma'am. Marcia, do you have?
But unless I'm missing the boat here, we have a plan in Vision Franklin, so correct me here. And what you are doing, if I'm, because right now, we have individual property owners that are coming, we're looking at our UGB here. We have individual property owners that are coming to us asking to be annexed, okay? We have a plan, we're looking at making some changes, possibly. You guys have met with stakeholders in the community and asking them, how do you want to see it, how do they want us to grow in this area? And so that's what we're doing here, is tweaking that. And I don't think it's up to us, to tell property owners, when they come to us, they're asking us, they're telling us what they want to do with their property, and we're saying yay, nay, whatever, based on what our vision has been for the city. So I think we've already done that, and we're tweaking that. But basically what I'm saying, and I see what what's going on, and I understand what you're saying, but for us to say a gas station needs to go in this corner, I don't think that's what we need to do. We say basically, this is going to be used for commercial, residential, whatever. So I think we do the high level, and then we decide on a case-by-case area, case-by-case base, that way. The one thing that I will say to you, and I kind of smirked at that, I agree with you, that yes, this is going to be kind of Cool Springs 2.0, whatever, but we get to say how that's done. I do have some concerns, though, and I understand that residents say that they want, certain things and all that. My concern, though, was with us saying off the top, without even looking at this, that we need to have increased density before we even look at the projects, before we even look at that, when we already have traffic concerns and all of that. So I just want us to pump the brakes on that. Let's just say that, we need for this area to be conservation, this area to be residential, this area to be, commercial. Let's not get that involved. Let's look at it. We have some issues. But I think we are doing that. I agree, yeah.
Right.
Let's look at the broader base, and we can decide that when they get here.
Right. Okay. Mayor Moore.
I'd like for you to go back to that slide early on in your presentation where you were showing some mixed-use development, some high-density or apartments.
Yeah, the interchange,
I don't remember which slide it was.
18.
18.
Because my concept of how all this started was that we had a number of people coming in wanting to develop this piece or that piece, and there were so many things that needed to be connected, and so that's why we're looking at this for a regional plan on how this area is going to develop, so we can then give guidance to these people that are wanting to develop their property. So I think we're getting there, we're just not quite there yet. I'm glad Alderman Peterson mentioned Long Lane Overpass, and we're moving forward quickly on that as fast as we can, but it's a big project that'll be important. I'm a little shocked by the concept that we might have a massive conference center at the Ag Center. I don't, I've never heard that concept, and I've been in a number of conversations, and maybe it's out there, but I don't see that happening. I see that happening in the Cool Springs area and redevelopment and some of those big parking lots that are there. And I would also agree that this is not going to be as big as Cool Springs, I don't think, but I think it is going to be a significant center. Now you look at just what you've seen develop on the east side with Dave Ramsey or Ramsey Solutions. He's going to be bringing a lot of folks in there. He's building an auditorium now, so a lot of his things are going to be coming here. Then you have Aetna and other things that we know are coming in that area. So there's going to be a lot of business activity down there, in my opinion. So I wish this were an easy process. We look for your continued guidance on how we walk through this and understand how we're going to connect the land use and the road network, which that's what we did before, so let's do it now and,
Yes,
and help us figure out and get through this.
please.
Sure.
So, Mayor, those are exactly the kind of comments that we need is, you know, what from these concepts do you support? I mean, ultimately, you know, what we're looking for is, you know, you've expanded the UGB. We're working on that, yes. Let me rephrase that, my apologies. You're working on expanding that. But, and so, yes, at a high level, what should be the land uses? But, you know, how much growth should there be? How much preservation should there be? Those are the decisions that you all need to make. You know, how much are we going to spend on infrastructure and who should be paying for that? So those are the decisions that we need you to tell us, you know, just as the mayor said, well, I'm shocked that there is a conference center there. You know, that should be over in Cool Springs. But you know what? I think that, yes, this is going to be a little bit more major of a center than you guys were thinking. So those are the kinds of things that tell us where you all are thinking and the direction that we need to be going in terms of the land use so that then we can tell the engineering group, all right, this is what we need to be looking at in the model, and this is what we're going to have to figure out the transportation solutions for.
I think you figure out the transportation solution now, and then
Right.
that's going to dictate what the development's going to be for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of those roads
What's practical.
are going to be us, just like Carruthers Parkway. That's our road. But a lot of the other roads are going to be the developers.
So we're getting very close to time here, and I've got some aldermen that haven't weighed in yet. I don't want to leave without
I have a
they're having a
question.
chance to make comments. But then I also, at the end of this all, want you to spend a few minutes on the next steps portion, because we've also got residents of that area that are here tonight. This is not typically a public hearing kind of a format here, but I want them to understand that there are still opportunities for community meetings and stakeholder engagements and those things going forward. So with that,
Oh, I was going to ask you, Adam, did you say that the entitlements that are already there and already in place, we already need the interchange and a flyover? Did I misunderstand that?
Well, if I did say that, that wasn't necessarily my intent, and I don't think, I don't think it's as simple as saying the entitlements necessitate that. I think either the interchange or the flyover may help to alleviate some of the congestion or delay issues that may be occurring when all of those entitlements come online. But to say, you know, we've already approved projects A, B, and C, so, hey, TDOT, come build us an interchange is not.
Good luck. I was going to ask you, what's the formula, Paul, for TDOT, what's the level of growth in the area would TDOT be willing to, because they would have to fund all of that, right?
Yeah, they would look to the locals to fund a portion of it, and they would fund a portion of it themselves. There's a lot of hurdles that we would have to go through to actually get it interchange. It would take many, many years to do it unless some big economic engine showed up at our doorstep. Part of the biggest problem with an interchange there is the fact that it's so close to a system interchange.
Yes.
And what a system interchange means, and I'm learning this too because we're actively meeting with TDOT on this now, is that what TDOT is saying is there's a chance that if we were to get an interchange approved there, that the feds would require them to upgrade the system interchange, which is $200-some million to upgrade that interchange to bring it to standard. It was not built to standard. And so, and TDOT said, good luck, basically, with that. So, you know, we just need to continue the conversation with TDOT about it, plan these additional connections to help provide alleviation. The other item I just wanted to point out, and I was asking Cynthia this, is the traffic model really does scare you looking at it, and I get that. You got to remember that's probably a peak hour traffic. You know, as you build urbanized areas, people expect an AM failure, a PM failure. And what you guys need to think about and give us feedback on is to what level of failure is acceptable. What we have up in Cool Springs, is that acceptable level of service of what you're looking at? And as they look at land use and as they look at appropriate zoning, we need to try to dial those land use recommendations into what is that expected level of failure you're anticipating and allowing. You know, and a good example that I've heard from a developer is, you know, there's businesses moving out of Maryland Farms because of that interchange there, and that failure level there that is happening on a daily basis. And my fear always is we don't want to recreate that to where our existing businesses are wanting to leave.
Right.
And so really getting that feedback, but remember, when you're looking at that, that's probably a peak hour only. And is it good the rest of the time? And that's really getting your feedback on that is very important to them making decisions on land use.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for mentioning road failure, because a couple statements and a question. One is sort of, as we look at our, you know, the developments we've been approving, what is our tolerance for road failure? What has typically been our tolerance for road failure? Have we not had one? Have we even had those conversations? And if there isn't one, should we be establishing what
Yeah,
we
exactly.
want our tolerance to be? Because I think the, you know, to not have that be a factor in all of this, I think is an
Right.
important consideration for sure.
Absolutely.
And maybe the tolerance that we've had before is not the tolerance that we have for the future. And you know, maybe new folks or whatever have a different idea of what we're willing to tolerate in our neighborhoods. Second thing is this is a data, or actually, let me say this. The Envision Franklin, this is not in Envision Franklin. And I think a lot of us, there's a number of us that are very much looking forward to the update to Envision Franklin. And so I'd almost say the hard part for me is I would look at the whole Envision Franklin, and then to look at this piece separately, I'd love to look at the entirety of that. Because does any adjustment to Envision Franklin elsewhere change what we might do here? And I think because that's coming up this year, I think that's an important consideration to what we're doing, is not just how does this fit in Envision Franklin, but the entirety of the whole thing.
Sure.
And the final question I have is just this, I'm still trying to understand why we have so many units that have not been constructed. What's driving the gap? Why aren't we not building these homes? If there's 14,000 units that have been approved but not built, what factors, I just don't understand it. What factors are driving us not building those? And if we continue to see that lag, as you push out years for this development, do we end up getting so far ahead of ourselves of approved units that and then market changes or market shifts? So I'm just kind of curious where that, I don't understand that number, and maybe you have that number, maybe you don't. Or,
Yeah, I'll answer that quickly. On average, I think the city brings on maybe 1,100, 1,200 new units every year. That's kind of like a rolling average over the last 20 years, and that's been pretty consistent. So, you know, there's usually 10 or 11,000 units in the pipeline right now. There's a little more, but that's what we've seen over time.
but sorry, Patrick, I'm going to give it to you right away. But our approval, we're approving more and more. I mean, obviously, clearly, we are approving a whole lot more units than we ever used to, and that number is only getting bigger. I mean, we're literally talking about extending meetings and trying to figure out how to get more volume through here. So it feels like we're going to be approving even more and more volume, but yet, and looking at the numbers, the construction rates and the build rates here are not significantly pacing with what we're approving.
Yes, sir. And some of these projects are very big, and you know, it could be a 20-year time horizon.
West Haven's not done yet.
And I would just say, and I know we're on time, some of them aren't served by adequate utilities right now. So that's why they're not coming out of the ground. And there is a financing and timing piece associated with the utility service to them to be able to get them going. Others are, you know, there might not be the market there for all of them yet.
Let me say, I just looked up Mill Crofton. You know where the water comes from? Harpeth Valley Utility District, that is the Cumberland River.
So a couple comments, because we're at time. I've heard this body say multiple times, we're hesitant on multifamily. I think this is the opportune time for this board to say, we haven't said it yet, but I see a lot of orange, a lot of brown, a lot of mixed use. I think this board needs to say, and maybe, you know, let's go for the yellow. Okay, single family. Okay, we've got 3,400 deficit units per the analysis. You get the West Harpeth Basin study that has more units, right, that have not been built, planned, have been planned through planning, but not proposed. You got 34 100 unit deficit. I don't know why we would we're setting ourselves up now, if we do not give them guidance to reduce the number of multifamily opportunities, we're setting ourselves up for the next few years to have more multifamily proposals in front of us. And so I don't know why this board, the first thing we didn't say was, let's reduce the areas that say residential mix, multifamily. Now, I'm not saying to do away with all of it, and then we're sitting here talking about traffic concerns. I mean, how much have we planned in the West Harpeth Basin? How many units have we planned over there? I know in that small area plan there was at least 2,000. At least. Am I remembering wrong? I wasn't on the board at that time.
I'd have to check on that.
But it's all the new McHatcher extension. So why would we not say, I know this is near infrastructure, I do, and I get it, and we don't have to say this is going to be Cool Springs 2.0. There's nothing that says it won't be if we don't go down a plan with that as what we're planning. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. And so I think along the interstate, that's one thing, but as you get down Long Lane, anyway, as I've listened to you all talk on the other meetings, this is the opportunity for us to speak into less density so we don't see it down the road and have these head-ons and I think single family needs to be out here. This is rural character. I think we can do something really, really special here, single family wise, in this rural and maintain rural character. And we're absolutely crazy if we don't take advantage of this beautiful rural setting and do some special single family out there, a conservation subdivision type overlay in a Vision Franklin, but something that is special and unique. If we don't set the standard now and we don't give them the guidance now, guess what we're going to be delivered? It ain't going to be. So those are my comments, but thank you.
And that's a great point to bring into this whole planning process. Alderman Potts, do you have some?
Yeah, I'll be very brief because I see that we're past our time, but very fast. Commissioner Allen brought this up. Now Alderman Baggett's also brought it up, and that is, what is going to be our percentage of mix for single-family home and all of the mix, all of the multifamily? And this is that time, and this is Ward 3 that we're looking at right here, and I'm going to be very protective of it. It's time to protect and preserve and to conserve this area. It's the look and the feel that's there, and we've got a great opportunity here to reduce this area so that it's not just an entire corridor of apartments and multifamily units that are all right there. So infrastructure has to be the focus right here. We've got to move this forward. And we've got to continue this conversation, as we said previously, that we were going to look at what that percentage of mix needs to be.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question.
Very quick.
I feel like that the whole area has got to have that infrastructure priority. I believe that the flyovers, Fort Myers, Florida had 300, 400, 500,000 people 10 years ago over there, and they were building 4 lanes everywhere. They were building flyovers. They were designing flyovers. And today, they've got 980,000 people in that town, and the traffic flows. It flows very well. And these flyovers, you need one at Goose Creek and Lewisburg Pike right now, going north and south. You need one Long Lane. You need one at 96 to Shoney's. I mean, it's crazy we don't have a flyover there where people can get off and get on the interstate, but not worry about flying over to go east to the urban growth boundary and to the area that we have the need for growth. So I don't want to see, I hate to put us in a box about downzoning or reshuffling the areas that are sensitive, and you know that'll come as we develop that infrastructure plan. That's the #1 priority.
Good point. Okay, so you want to?
Yeah, and I'll just say briefly, I mean, I think this slide covers it fairly well. So we're going to take this very helpful discussion this evening. Again, thank you all. And work with Andrew and the rest of the staff and Paul and Jimmy and make some refinements to these before we pass them off to CDM Smith to run the transportation analyses, and then we'll be sharing that at a community meeting on April 19th. We're also going to be doing some additional stakeholder meetings around that time, or probably in conjunction with that. And then we'd like to come back to you all, assuming there's room on the joint conceptual agenda on May 26th, to again share where we are in the process and get your input. We'll be probably making another round of tweaks to the scenarios before we finalize the transportation analysis, and then work on the strategy of how to pay for it and the sewer and water extensions that would be required to serve
Okay.
the development scenario.
Thank you, Adam, Cynthia, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So-
Appreciate it.